First of all, thanks everybody for being able to eat and sit and talk all at the same time and networking. We want to be able to use this time right now with our next administration official to be able to go right again into questions and answers. As many of you might already know, John, he's been one of the top leaders in the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I asked him just to go straight into talking a little bit about, what his office does, but we want to get right away into questions and answers. We know that many of the questions that you had in some of our earlier sessions was around housing and sustainable communities, and John's the right person for you. So I'm going to have John just do a quick introduction, and then we're going to dive into questions and answers.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor to be your Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. What we do at FHEO is obviously enforce the Fair Housing Act, race, religion, national origin, color, gender, people with families, and people with disabilities. Those are the areas, but I think what's particularly important is our initiative on national origin discrimination. Going into, I just came back from Las Vegas last Friday, where we did a town hall meeting focused specifically on outreach to the Latino communities, Asian American communities, on national origin discrimination. We've been to Omaha, as you know, that's right next to Fremont, Nebraska, where if the law hadn't been blocked by the courts, you'd have to go to the police department before you'd be able to rent in Fremont, Nebraska. We'll be coming up. We'll be doing sessions at the NCLR conference coming up, and in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Charlotte. So we're going to the areas of the country that typically are not the 5 gateway states, but also our role is to make sure that people know what their rights are, their responsibilities, and the remedies and resources available to them under the Fair Housing Act. We've started to use our bilingual hiring authority, so both of our investigators in Las Vegas are Spanish bilingual. We have a Chinese bilingual staff investigator in Orange County. We are looking for people to add to our team. We're looking for a Spanish speaker in Albuquerque to head that office, also in Little Rock, Arkansas. So we are blending both the traditional areas as well as the new areas for the community. We're happy to answer your questions, and I know a number of you, and look forward to continuing our work together. Hi.
Great. Questions? Yes.
Congress Delgado vote on National Conference of Puerto Rican Amendments. Is the foreclosure crisis over? How did it impact the Hispanic community in general, and what can we do in the future to avoid such cataclysms?
Well, the foreclosure crisis is by no means over. And clearly it has affected the Latino community, African American communities, and tremendous amounts of lost wealth. I mean, you look at going back from the mid-'80s when we had legalized individuals. They went from temporary status to permanent status to citizenship to home ownership. And particularly that area, that group, that really the backbone of the Latino working and middle class, were drastically affected by the foreclosure crisis. Our work in fair housing deals with some of the mortgage discrimination that has gone on in the past, also eradicating some of the scammers that are still out there. So we have provided funding to a number of different organizations specifically targeted to lending discrimination, to working with the state AGs and my friend Tom Pettis at the Civil Rights Division on to eradicate some of the mortgage lending areas. Going forward, obviously what's critically important, which we were not able to keep in the budget this year, the housing counselors. The work that so many people in this room do, and I've been with you to a variety of different places where the housing counselors sit and work with the lenders, work with the community to make sure people know how to get out of their current situation, but also more important, to prepare and plan for the future. And that is consistently our vision. As you know, in the FY12 budget that our budget is going to come out shortly, it includes money for housing counseling. We don't know whether we're going to get it. That's obviously an important area.
Great. Next question.
Yes, speaking in the lines of housing and foreclosure, the process is so cumbersome right now for people who are losing their home. I mean, already it's an overwhelming task when they're losing their home, and so then to jump through the hoops that they need to go through. And I understand the initial application is a one-sheet process, but then it goes through, like, you have to call all the time. Lenders are not friendly. And so, you know, I think that there's a lot of responsibility on right now in the federal government in terms of pushing onto the lenders that they have to be more friendly, they have to be more educational, and they have to be more open to the process. So what is being done right now about that?
Can you, your name and organization?
Diana Rodriguez from the Sacramento City Unified School District.
Great. Thank you, Diana. Well, and I think more and more attention is given to it. And I know people don't really care. They look at the federal government as the federal government. But a large part of this is over at Treasury. A large part is ahead. Both Secretary Geithner and Secretary Donovan have met with the top people in the banking industry to push them to do more. A lot of the programs that do exist they virtually all require the lender cooperation, and it has been uneven. And when I go around the country to different communities, I ask people, so where do the different banks line up? And I get different answers depending on the community. So we have come up with, rolled out some programs early on in this administration, and then have adjusted the programs based upon the geography. Currently, there are programs for those who are not in bad mortgages necessarily, but are unemployed or are underwater. So there are different types of programs, but the key is making sure people know what those programs are. And as you acknowledged and made clear, because it depends on lender cooperation, we have to continue to push the industry to do a better job.
Yes.
Other questions? Yes. The mic, please, and then also your name and organization, please.
My name is Zuleika Cabrera Drenane, and I'm with the Institute for the Puerto Rican Hispanic Elderly. One of the areas that I find and I like to see in terms of the Mitchell-Lamas, the ones that become private, and the impact it has on the elderly population and the displacement that it has. How is that going, and are you continuing privatizing most of these Mitchell-Lamas?
I'm sorry. What are you?
Huh? It is? The Mitchell-Lama? I thought it was HUD.
I'm not.
It's
I'm
a,
not
it's a
sure
federal,
what-
and you're right, Okay,
Okay.
okay. But the other area of that, do you ever see Section 8 coming back in a little bit larger proportion?
It is yes. I mean that is one of our key areas. The housing choice vouchers, whether it's through Section 8, and the particularly important part of that, from my perspective, in fair housing, is to make sure that the Latinos who are there have full access to Section 8. We are working in a number of different enforcement areas around the country where heavily Latino users of Section 8 have been discriminated against.
Oh.
Bill Lanley, the former Assistant Attorney General in the Clinton administration, has recently brought a suit on behalf of Latino and African American residents in Lancaster and Palmdale, California, and that is one we are looking very, very closely at to make sure that Latino, but any Section 8 voucher holders are not singled out.
Gentleman from Puerto Rico.
Yes, hi, I'm Eduardo Batia from Puerto Rico. Two questions. One is,
You sure it's
do you have
Mitchell
data
Lamas? Okay.
that, or you can share perhaps later with us in terms of the foreclosures, in terms of the heavily Latino states? How is it, in those pockets, how is it being affected, and how, because it's an issue, it really is an issue for states that have large Latino populations. And therefore, it has to be addressed locally also by the policymakers. The second issue is more a philosophical question. Does HUD still recommend that folks who are starting buy homes, or should they rent?
I'm not sure how much I have for the second question in terms of time, but let me get to the first question first. And you're absolutely right. I can provide you data, and I provide all of you data later on. But the states that are hardest hit are the ones where there's heavily Latino populations: California, Florida, Arizona, Nevada. There's another one. So usually states with a lot of sand. Those are, and I've walked the neighborhoods, and you see the difference. So when we're able to when we have an impact, it goes both ways. Is that you can have a house in a neighborhood where there's a foreclosure. It affects not just that house, but all the other houses in the entire neighborhood around it. When we're successful, you can also see the successes. In terms of the larger question of, is HUD still behind home ownership as the American dream? Yes, but it has to be combined with financial literacy and combined with other options, making other options attractive. We've looked at patterns of other countries where renting is as part of that country's dream as well. But we don't want to, in the process of dealing with the bad mortgage practices of the recent years, we don't want to pull out the rug from everybody. People can still prepare to buy homes, so that's certainly not off the table.
Can I just make one last comment on that? Not just on that, but the prior panel had to do with immigration.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the issues that has come up over and over again recently is the fact that with so many baby boomers reaching the age where they sell their homes and move to a smaller apartment, there's a glut of housing out there. And it is perhaps the working immigrants who can actually buy those homes. But we have to solve the issue of immigration before they can actually go and legally buy those homes. Is that something that you're looking into at all?
Well, from my perspective, that's exactly what I'm looking into. And as I said earlier, the group that got legalized back in the 80s, they became the homeowners after they were able to regularize their status and move up and be able to prepare for that. So yes, you would see the same thing again. What we're looking at HUD overall is in terms of immigrant integration. There will be comprehensive immigration reform, whether it's today, tomorrow, or whenever. That's not for HUD to say, but it will be there. And we want to channel I would say intelligence, the energies of the mayors and city council members and the school boards, not into these anti-immigrant ordinances, but into local matters that make all the difference in the world on immigrant integration. One of those is fair housing. Another is access to equal credit for mortgages.
John, I obviously I have no doubt of your commitment to this issue. It's your entire life's work. But when you look at the foreclosure workouts, and you look at the fact that our communities, the African American community and the Hispanic community, were the hardest hit, yet you don't see the workouts for them as aggressively as you've seen in other communities, right? And what can you do to sort of force banks to be much more aggressive on that? Because it isn't only the fact that it takes our people longer to work these out, but that our communities get left behind, and obviously the impact is far greater because there are so many houses. It is not, that part of the market is not as attractive, and the banks aren't working them out as quickly because the margins are much less.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said earlier, we are constantly readjusting the programs to address prior to the time earlier addressing the mortgages, now addressing the unemployment issue, channeling different monies into different geographic areas. The NSP program, works with community-based organizations to allow them to buy homes and local jurisdictions to buy homes for affordable housing. So there are a panoply of programs that are out there. Obviously, they are not working as successfully as they should, but we're going to continue to work at it. It's constantly looking at what is working, what's not working, and then adjusting to it.
Specifically, sort of when you look at the lenders, right? The very fact that, to some degree, the impact now is not necessarily the house, but getting out of the house and getting that house back into the market, right? That they're working out other groups' problems before they're working out those communities that are most impacted, and that the housing market, particularly the African American and Hispanic community, where the overvaluation and the money taken out is far greater on some of these, and the interest of the market to pick up these assets isn't as great because is there any way to sort of force lenders to work these loans out much more aggressively
Well, that's not my particular area to deal with, but obviously if we can get you to the people in housing and Treasury to address some specifics, whether it's in Florida or elsewhere, I'd be happy to do that.
Elizabeth Valdez with the IF, Industrial Areas Foundation Network in Texas. Does HUD or TDHCA oversee the hurricane relief money now that we're in the hurricane season again? Is your department overseeing the hurricane relief funds?
HUD does. It's our contribution to it is the Community Development Block Grant Program typically. So they have to, as part of getting CDBG money, they have to follow the civil rights laws.
Because there is some funding that is pending for the state of Texas for both the Houston-Galveston area as well, the southern tip of Texas, and that is 3 years in process. So anything that can cut that red tape would be very helpful, because families are now going to go in through their 4th year of hurricane
Right, just note, you're absolutely right, but just know too, that the money goes down to the state doesn't always get the money out the door fast enough, and so some of the problems are down there. We've been spending a lot of time dealing with Galveston and the reshaping of the public housing off the island and north of Broadway, and it is a situation that we look at very, very closely.
Ernesto Loperena, New York Council on Adoptable Children. I have a question regarding, you mentioned before lost wealth. Some people might describe it as a transfer of wealth from the middle class and the poor to banks and financial securities firms. And I'm wondering what the department is looking at in terms of policies to prevent this from happening again.
Well, the department itself is not the place that would be doing it. That would be the Department of Treasury. I can't speak fully as to that aspect of the problem, but it's something that the secretaries and the president are well aware of.
Javier Gonzalez with the Latino Leadership Alliance of Silicon Valley. Just a feedback, I'd like to see the administration apply greater pressure on the banks to really work with banks and loan servicing companies to work with the homeowners, because what I've experienced in working with community people is that these banks and loan servicing companies are just, they take the initial request and they just go in circles and circles. They don't have a direct person to deal with, and so people are getting frustrated and they're leaving their homes, and it's unfortunate. And coming from San Jose, where it's one of the areas that's greatest hit, to see families and neighborhoods just abandoned is it's sad, and it's not good for the economy, and it's destroying people's the American dream for communities of the Latinos, Asians, African Americans. So just like the banks during the financial meltdown were knocking on the government steps asking for money and a bailout, it's time for the banks to be good corporate citizens and work honestly with these people to keep them in their homes.
Well, it's past time. No, agreed.
Yes, I'm
Last question.
Reverend Eve Nunez from Arizona, the National Hispanic Leadership Conference, and I'm also a HUD counselor. I started working 3 years ago to assist my community and went through certification through NeighborWorks and got all my volunteers. Let's help our community. But what we have seen in 600 clients that we have seen as HUD counselors in the last, I would say, 18 months is we've seen a lot of discrimination with servicers and banks, and especially against Hispanics and some African Americans. And even though we've done the escalations, got through HUD to try to get help for some of our clients, we've not seen the results that I would like to see. I really wish that we could have kept some of that funding for HUD counselors, because those are the true, I believe, saints in the community. It was like a life support that people could go to a HUD counselor, not pay anything, but get some type of help. And we were able to help some people. We did get good outcomes, but literally had to fight with these servicers and loan specialists. And my recommendation is that the loan servicers that we were competing against go through the same education that we had to go through to help some of the families that were losing their homes, and listen to some of their stories. I saw discrimination with the disabled. I saw, like I said, Hispanics, and we need to see what can be done to put some of those housing counselors back to work and see oversight over some of those loan specialists that are telling mothers, get a divorce if you want me to help you. I had a woman that was disabled, 30 years old. The bank told her when we were on a speakerphone, divorce your husband and we'll help you stay in your home. I mean, I have story after story. I have recordings, serious,
Okay.
very serious problem.
And that's where we will jump in on, whether it's family status discrimination or
Yes.
or national origin discrimination. I'm not sure I'm sure you brought those up to the right level of attention, but they didn't
Escalation
get over
department.
they didn't get over to fair housing, because once they do,
Right.
we will move and act on those.
Yes.
Again, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The lightning round. Here you go, John. Great. So now we're waiting for our next group, and the next group is on the Small Business Administration and access to capital for small businesses. How you doing? Go ahead. Thanks, and a reminder, I'm doing my best to call on everybody as equitably as possible. Please keep your hands up if you need me to call on you, because I forget when you put your hands back down. So if you need, please put your hands up again. I apologize, I'm trying to do my best.
That Alzheimer's starting to kick in?
Excuse me?
Alzheimer's starting to kick in?
Yes, yes, yes.
Every time I try to get away, I try to get
Small business.
start a business, start selling them pizza.
No, it's not there.
They're on their way.
That's small business.
So they're on their way.
Okay. No, no, yeah, no. No, it's not TV. It's in our it's in our we're gonna announce it. That was just the back up front. The back up front. All right, we have our next set of speakers.
There's four of us.
Yep. Yep. So you get four. So we're about to get started. We can take our seats. And so we have our next session around small business and access to capital. As you all know, and I'm going to let them know that since there's four of them, what we're going to ask them to do is just introduce themselves and their office. We don't right now need any top line or any explanations. We're going to just jump into questions. This group has been excellent. They've been averaging around 20 questions a session.
Wow.
So the only way we're going to be able to do that is to get started. So we're going to have them introduce themselves, their offices, and then as soon as they're done introductions, we're going to get started. So you want to start?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Josephs. I'm the Senior Advisor for Policy at the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund at the Department of Treasury. Thank you. It's nice being here.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon. My name is Alejandra Castillo. I'm the National Deputy Director of the Minority Business Development Agency at the Department of Commerce. And I have to say, it's tough to speak at a crowd where we have so many friends and families in the room, so I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is J.D. Salinas. I'm the Regional Administrator for General Service Administration, including Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Louisiana, and Arkansas. I work for Mr. Campos usually, but today I'm working here today, volunteer. See you.
Good afternoon. My name is Anna Harvey, and I'm Assistant Administrator for the Office of Women Business Ownership at the Small Business Administration.
Great. So you know who they are. Questions? Yes, right here. Mark.
I'm Mark Morgani with the National Latino Coalition on Climate Change. There's, with the previous speaker, we were talking about housing issues, and I want to draw a relationship between that and small business. A lot of the way that Latinos will often develop their equity is through their houses. And there is some people who've asked questions in the last speaker about the move to the administration towards pushing more towards renting than on home ownership. The long-term effect, there are short-term effects and long-terms. One of the long-term effects is that we as a community, since we use our houses to build the equity, won't have that not as many families will have that as a source of building equity. And one thing, significant things that our community does with that equity, besides sending their kids to school and other things, is to build a small business from it. I was wondering how you might be working with HUD or Treasury, who's also doing work on this, to be able to say that this is a significant part of small business, is the housing ownership and equity in that.
Well, I can start a little bit just from the Small Business Administration, just to say that I used to own my own business before I became the president of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in Washington, D.C., and I'm here. So I was just on that side of the room not long ago. And I financed my business through my own, capital. So I'm very, very aware of what's happening. My goal right now is to open new avenues for those companies not to rely solely on that type of financing. So, with the SBA, we guarantee loans, and of course, we still have to go through the lending, through the lending partners. But we want to guarantee the loan 85% that we're guaranteed up to a limit. But for our community, for Hispanics, I think we should take advantage of the micro lending programs that we have at the SBA, up to $50,000 in 6 years is a really, really good way. And we just need to educate our community that there are other sources of capital that is not our house, and is not actually, in my case, I even use credit cards because I did not know that we had all these services. So we just need to inform the community that there are other sources of financing.
The General Service Administration doesn't work with housing directly, but what we're doing is, as the GSA invests more than $30 billion a year. And then if you take that other federal agencies, and what we spend is $465 billion nationwide. What we're trying to do is a lot of outreach to help small business and minority-owned businesses to get on GSA schedule so that the federal government can buy from those small businesses. So that's our charge, and that's what we're trying to do, is a lot of outreach to help in that.
So I was going to say, I'm part of the Treasury Department, the CDFI fund. We support a network of community-based financial institutions, banks, credit unions, loan funds that work in low-income neighborhoods and target distressed borrowers. And they provide assistance for housing for first-time home buyers, also for small business lending and microenterprise lending. And the administration has supported large increases in our budget to support these activities over the last few years. And it's worthwhile to note that about 1 out of every 5 of our CDFIs is working in markets where at least 25% of the population is Latino population. We've invested over $1 billion in these areas over the last several years, and through our New Market Tax Credit program, over $2.9 billion has been invested in communities with at least a 25% Latino population. So these are programs that have a lot of support from the administration and are really hitting the markets you're talking about.
So when you talk about the SBA programs and what's going on, clearly when you look at major lending institutions that do not they'll buy your paper because they love it once the loan is processed, but beforehand they won't. Why don't you require them, those who buy paper, which obviously it's a great paper to buy, it's guaranteed, that they process these loans? There are literally thousands of bankers that are unemployed now with the restructuring that know how to process these loans, that could do it on the outside. Secondly, you reduce the amount that the what do they call it, the person who creates the loan, the writer.
The originator.
That gets, so it makes it even less incentive for the bank on the front end. And so what we've done is make it impossible for small banks and even large banks to even engage in these programs. They buy the loan, they get your credit, but they're not.
I'm going to cheat a little bit because I watched you this morning ask that question
good,
before.
good.
So it's a great recommendation. I was, it was the live stream, like, oh, that was a really, so I wrote that down already as a recommendation.
I'm glad somebody's watching.
Yeah, I was watching.
Any other questions? The name and organization.
J.R. Gonzalez, NHPO, the National Hispanic Business Organization. I asked a question earlier from another person. I didn't quite get a straight answer. We were talking about the president of this administration is beating the drum, more jobs, more jobs, more jobs. We're looking at the Latino community. We all know the numbers. We know the increase. The fact that Latino-owned businesses are growing 3 times faster than any other market segment. Latina-owned business growing 6 times faster. We're very significant. We're entrepreneurial. We're a significant part in the economic engine of this country, and are going to be very, very, very significant also in recovery. But at the same time, we're still getting either, I don't want to say discrimination, but there's some discriminatory practice out there, whether it be lending from banks or, and I'm not saying it's happening with the SBA, but there's some obstacles that our community faces. But at the same time, as the president is beating that drum to say we need more jobs, I mean, the basic form of economic development for anybody is a good job. How do we get this organization, our different organizations, to get that word out and try to encourage or put something into place where we can start maybe motivating or encouraging people to start new business and get jobs out there?
I'm going to try to give you a straight answer, and I'm going to try my best.
I appreciate it.
The issue is now not solely creation of businesses. I think you've stated the stats. Latino are creating businesses at a very fast rate, particularly Hispanic women are creating a lot of businesses. The issue really is, how do we make them grow? Because if we don't have capacity in size and scale, it is very difficult to get those contracts to explore new markets. And at the end of the day, it's, as Ana said, it's to educate our communities that the services are out there. They can go to SBA, they can come to MBDA. We have over 40 different funded centers. They need to have those technical assistance and support to make sure that the focus is on growing. And that's where the job creation starts to happen. And you're absolutely right. Latino-owned business, minority-owned businesses, as the president challenges us to export more, minority-owned businesses are twice as likely to consider exporting than non-minorities for various reasons, linguistic and cultural ties. And they're succeeding. But they're succeeding because at some point they connect to the network of resources that are out there. And I think we need to do a better job communicating those resources, and the community needs to do a better job understanding that they're there to help them.
But how can we help you communicate that?
The way I just define this in my own terms is that for us Hispanics, we need to stop improvising our way to success. We just need to find the resources. We need to make sure that we connect. We should have a plan. And I'm not talking about a simple business plan, but it's a plan of what is it that I want to do, how far I want to go, and see what that pot of gold that's yours, and just not improvise our way to success, but just plan our way to success. And it's kind of a vague answer, but it's just that we have to do. We just have to.
More importantly, it's not going to happen overnight, because as Joe knows, these type of relationships, particularly if you're doing business with the government, you need to have those relationships. You need to make sure that you're in front of the obstacles. You need to make sure that you know who the contracting officers are, what the forecast is, how are you planning. These are all growth strategies that take time, but we need to start today.
One of your questions is, for example, what is it that NHPO can help? The General Service Administration right now is trying to get as many people as we can that are good companies to get on our GSA schedule. And how you can help us is by hosting us and get the General Service Administration to come to your community, to your college, or wherever you may have, and help you get your small business on our schedule. If you're not on the GSA schedule, it's going to be hard to do business with federal government.
Great.
Okay.
Perfect segue. So Latinos are the fastest growing businesses. They're also the fastest closing businesses. So Alejandra, an area that you know well, Washington Heights in New York, is losing has lost about 1 out of every 3 businesses on 180th Street in the last 18 months. So I wanted to just say, not a question, but a suggestion, that we should be using the networks that exist in our community as bridges to help these small businesses. That it's not just about telling a small business through an email or e-buy, hey, we're doing this solicitation, but that we use these networks to convene these small businesses, and as you say, outside of the 40 centers which get taxed, say, this is how you do this, and provide the technical support and the capacity building around accessing small business loans, as well as government contracts, as well as local government contracts as well. And I will say, I have not seen that level of community engagement. And Lilian Rodriguez-Lopez, I run the Hispanic Federation. We have a very large network, and no one has said to us, can you help us convene a meeting of the chambers in our region?
Well, I will make that request because, as you know, New York is very near and dear to my heart, not just Washington Heights, and I've traveled to Wichita, Kansas, to Moline, Illinois. I tell people, if you invite me, I will definitely go. I'm a public servant. But more importantly, I thank you for the comment because we're trying to broaden the narrative of what Latino policy issues are. And minority-owned businesses is right in the middle of it. Not as a social issue or a civil rights issue, but as a business imperative issue.
The other issue that we have is, and with my NHLA hat, we've gone and met with a lot of the different department secretaries, and sometimes it's very hard to diagnose the problem when they're unwilling to give you metrics around how the contracting is going with Latino businesses or Hispanic-owned businesses throughout federal government. And that's something that I think we need to see if there's a solution that is within the law, which we think it could be, where you actually find ways of quantifying that, because it's very hard to treat a patient when you really haven't been able to diagnose the symptoms.
And Lillian, we definitely should sit down and talk more. And I think
all of us here would be very excited about
we have an opportunity. William Ramos is in the room. We're going to have a new Commerce Secretary as well as a Deputy Secretary. And I think this is the perfect time for NHLA to really speak to the Commerce Department.
Thank you.
Right here.
Elizabeth Valdez with the Industrial Areas Foundation out of Texas. It is interesting that in light of the recession that we are facing and have been facing for the last couple of years, what we have found is that in going and talking to employers, there are jobs that continue to go begging for a skilled workforce and are high wage career path jobs, but the employers need to be at the table to have those conversations to see what are the skills that people need, partnering with a community college, and even adapting curriculum if needed be for that skill set to be there as well. But also include the community. The community needs to be aware of what are the jobs so that they can also be interested in developing those skills. So we've created what we call labor market intermediaries that partner with the employers, with the community college, with the community at large, with businesses, so that together we can address the issues and say, look, we have a community college that is developing the skill sets for the jobs to come to our community, whether they're minority owned or not, so that, you know, those businesses can go to a community.
I have to applaud you because that's exactly what we need to do. And I'll give you an example. In Wichita, Kansas, they have a Boeing plant. They also have Spirit Airlines, which is a subcontractor to Boeing. The community in Wichita, Kansas is not connected to Boeing because of that gap in the skill sets. So we need to do more STEM, whether it's a charter school or just getting it into the curriculum, because you're absolutely right. The gap, if we don't address it on the educational level and on the skill set level, that is a very challenge.
Well, in South Texas, we're importing nurses from the Philippines when there is a line of people trying to get into those jobs and our career jobs.
Yeah.
But what's interesting in this scenario is that it's been difficult to get the federal government, i.e. the Department of Labor, Education, or whoever, to invest in those kind of local labor market intermediaries so that they can expand and grow.
Let me get questions. I got 2 more questions there and there. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. Hi, Roger Rivera, National Hispanic Environmental Council. I want to follow up on the one of the issues that Lillian just alluded to, and it's this. As she said, NHLA has been meeting with the cabinet secretaries for the last 2.5 years. talk about a snapshot of Latinos, how we're doing at these agencies in employment, in education, in partnerships, and then in minority business. And when we can get the numbers from the secretaries and from their staff when it comes to the numbers of Latinos in employment, in education, internships, scholarships, et cetera, partnerships, all of that. But what we can never get are the numbers regarding minority business, specifically the numbers of the status of Latino contracting with federal agencies. And the subset to this issue is, what's sort of driving some of us crazy is, it seems some agencies do break down their numbers in terms of minority business opportunities and contracts led at these agencies by ethnicity and race. But seemingly the answer we've mostly got is, I'm sorry, we either can't or we won't do that. Some agencies cite Adirond as the reason why they cannot do that. Other agencies cite their general counsel's advice why they can't do that. But when we press a little bit, the answer typically is not that they won't do it. It's that, well, maybe we can and maybe we can't. So given the composition of this panel, can you give us a definitive answer as to whether or not federal agencies can compile data as to minority business by ethnicity and race, specifically by the Latino community?
I know the SBA is not compiling that, and I have to actually go back to my general counsel and ask why, because actually to make the numbers, I do minority and women-owned businesses, and even when I go to Congress, they ask me for numbers and the numbers that I don't have. There's different impediment. For example, for in my case, for women business ownership, I cannot. It's voluntary information to ask for their ethnic, background. So it's not reliable in terms of my program. So it's different layers. But I would be happy to go back and just give you an answer from SBA.
The General Service Administration has to keep up with contract by contract. For example, if we have a construction contract, we have a goal of 40% MBWA, we have to make sure that that happens. So I'm not sure how we get to those numbers, but I'll check and give you my card and meet you afterwards and see how the General Service Administration does that.
Roger, you're right on target. It's very difficult. And Adirond is cited, and so is Rothy. A lot of different Supreme Court cases that are along the lines of race and ethnicity, and the General Counsel have and many times advised that that's not the way they break the numbers down. They break the numbers down by minority-owned, women-owned, veteran disabled, hub zones, but it is very difficult. And I too, like you, would like to have those numbers, but I have not been able to get those.
Real quick last question, please.
I'm Tanya Martinez, and my volunteer role here is the Hispanic National Bar Association, but my day job is that I work with my family. My father, 40 years ago, created a manufacturing business that does manufacturing for the Department of Defense and Department of Energy, mainly vehicles, ground support systems for the military and so forth. And my father has done a great job of being very successful up to this point, and now it's up to my brother and I to take up the helm and go to the next generation. And I would really encourage the administration to take a look at the longevity of the businesses. As Ms. Castillo had pointed out earlier, really we have to look at the longevity and going to the second and third generation, whether it's a family-owned business or not, to make sure that those businesses continue to thrive. One particular concern that we have working in the energy and defense space is this idea of the federal contracts mainly going to these prime contractors. And you were talking about statistics, and several of the comments that have been made resonate with me, because it's very difficult as a small, especially small minority-owned business, and soon to be small minority women-owned business, because it's taken over from my father, to be able to penetrate these markets. There's not a lot of data. I understand that it's very volunteer, and so I encourage you to please be able to work with the prime contractors and see how access can be given to this.
Absolutely. Great. Just very, very quickly, we're trying to work on the unbundling of the bundles. So.
Exactly.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank Thank you so much.
Kansas City next month to go see my daughter.
Oh, have fun. How is he doing?
I'll see you in a 2 minutes, or I'll send it to you. I'd love to process the SBA loans. They're unrecoverable. They take forever, and you guys don't answer. Just like, and there are literally thousands of bankers all over the country.
It's been over, it's gonna be
Yes.
over 24 hours.
But it's a good point, sustainability.
Digamos.
¿Vas a estar aquí mañana también? Gracias.
All right, we could get ready for our next speaker. An issue that has been raised several times already here around STEM issues.
That has been already raised. Who raised eyes have turned left. I probably don't think that I'm
STEM, your favorite topic. Hey, Kumar, there you are. I saw you go over there. Just had to sneak up. Come on in, come on in. All right, we're going to get started with our next session. And I would just like to, again, Kumar is going to do his own introduction, but throughout the course today, we've been talking about bridging the pipeline, how to get education and workforce together. And obviously, one of the big areas is around the STEM field. So we'd like to just head the panel over, give the mic over to Kumar, who's in charge here with the White House Office of Science and Technology. And again, brief, 1 minute, what your title is, and then we want to jump into questions because the people here have a lot of questions, and they get mad at me if I don't pick on everyone. So I have to make sure we get enough time. So go ahead, Kumar.
Well, all right. Hey, hi everyone. So my name is Kumar Garg. I work on education for the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. That means I report to the President's Science Advisor. And we, huddle up with Office of Public Engagement, the Department of Education, the Domestic Policy Council, the National Economic Council on all things education related. But we were really excited that STEM was a topic here. I've been in government now 2 years, and I focus on the cross-cutting focus in education. And the reason why I thought this was really useful, and I want to, basically use this as an opportunity to get your feedback, is the president is just really passionate on this issue. We always joke that we don't know when he got religion on this issue. It was before we showed up. And the reason I think the president really focuses on this, he started focusing on it from day one of the administration, is I think this is really about the jobs and careers of the future. How are we going, more and more jobs of the future are going to be science, technology related. How are we making sure that students today are ready for those jobs, that all students today are ready for those jobs, and steps that we're taking on a federal policy level, on a public-private partnerships level, on a bully pulpit level to make sure that's happening. So the president, early on in the administration, went to the National Academy of Sciences and really put down a marker, which was, how can we go from middle of the pack? How can we go from 17th and 25th back to the top of the pack in math and science education? And this is a really big lift. And so it's going to really require an all hands on deck. So that involved making STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and math education, and building it into our core programs, building it into Race to the Top, and making it the sole competitive priority, and giving real emphasis on what states were doing around underrepresented groups. That meant thinking about public-private partnerships in a really serious way. So launching the Educate to Innovate campaign, which is really challenge companies, nonprofits, foundations to do more. And we, for example, launched Change the Equation, which is a coalition of 110 CEOs that are focused on this issue. And it involves, continue to think about what are two new steps. So the president in the State of the Union called for 100,000 new math and science teachers that would be able to train into these subjects over the next decade. And so one thing that I'll sort of talk about now that I've hit my 2-year mark in the White House and feel like a veteran is, in addition to the policy side, in addition to I think one thing that I always underappreciate in this job, and I underappreciated before I came in, is a really powerful role that we do in idea matching. I want to do this, and it would be great to work with X. Because one thing that's really powerful in these spaces are multi-sector collaborations. And so, I think it's really powerful to ask the question, imagine if X, Y, and Z came together and worked on an issue. So imagine if the video game companies came together and built a game that was as successful at teaching at math and science as it was in creating monsters and killing monsters and taking their treasure. Or imagine a social media campaign that took the best of what the Valley is thinking about, spreading memes through and thought about how parents could get their kids more involved, or how students could take their passion and spread it to other students. So I think there's a lot to be done here. I would love to hear your thoughts about both things you're finding exciting and really powerful collaborations.
Here.
Representative Ruben Gallego from Arizona. I actually have a great story in Arizona. We have Carl Hagen Robotics, Falcon Robotics team, and they've gone to the National Underwater Robotics Tournament as well as robotics tournament, beaten MIT. This is a high school team, low-income, Latino, some even undocumented students, and they've won this award. And previous award winners have actually met the president. They have not been invited. And it would be really good if you could take a message to the president. Please invite them, because that is a great way to inspire the Latino community to be inspired to follow science and engineering, to see these young Latinos and Latinas that are in really one of the poorest parts of this country be at the White House to receive an award that doesn't have to do with sports, but has to do with science and engineering. I think it would really go a long way. There are people that are trying to write movies about these kids. I would really encourage the president to please invite them. They've actually asked me personally to bring that question up if I ever had a chance, so I'm fulfilling my promise to them.
No, that's great. So the president definitely agrees, right? So one of the things that he still talks about a lot on the trail is the fact that we did the first ever White House Science Fair. And what the president talked about at the White House Science Fair was, that we need to, if we're going to get ahead, we need to celebrate our STEM stars, the students who are doing math and science, just like we celebrate our sports stars. And he had this, he was joking about, you may not get Gatorade poured over your head, but maybe you should, because if you're doing well in math and science, you're really playing for the future. And so part of, we had some amazing students at the first one. I'm not saying that we caught everybody, but for example, there was a really interesting student, a team that came out of Arizona that was, it was their second time on an airplane coming to the White House Science Fair. They had a fellow student that had disabilities, and they designed a robotic chair to assist him with his disability. And so we would love more ideas for how to celebrate this work. And this goes back to this whole question about culture, which is the president really believes that in a free society you get what you celebrate. And so we have to be having a conversation about how this is a fundamental opportunity going forward.
Right here, and then hold on. Right here first.
My name is Javier Gonzalez with the Latino Leadership Alliance of Silicon Valley, and I also work for state legislator, Assemblymember Nora Campos. In the discussions that she's had with CEOs of Silicon Valley, education and STEM is a big issue. Yes. What is the administration going to do to make sure that poor school districts or districts with poor resources are making sure that those curriculums are making it to the classroom? Because it is our Latino children, African American children, who are not going to get those opportunities to become the next scientists, engineers, if they don't have that foundation of level of education when they're students. So what do you guys see yourself playing a role in making sure that districts that don't have the resources compared to other districts to make sure that that is in the classrooms?
Right.
And there's partnerships and other things that are out there, but how can we use the pulpit or the president and also existing resources to make sure that that happens in our poor income neighborhoods?
Yes. So I think this is a great question. I think this is something the president always goes back to. This came up in the Twitter town hall where the president got a question about, hey, if we're struggling with education, why don't we just privatize it? And what the president said was, this is a public responsibility. It's not just a public responsibility. At every major transformation that the American economy has taken, it is because we've stepped up and reinvested in our future that we've been able to make those transitions. It involved moving into a conversation about every child should go to high school when it came to folks making it from the agricultural sector for the manufacturing age. It involved, investing in the GI Bill when folks came back. And so the president really thinks we have to invest. And the other part is the president thinks it has to be something where we're building math and science into our core education reform agenda. So we want to that's why we want the Department of Education at the core, and we built it in the race to the top. That's why we talk about math and science when we talk about school turnaround, and we talk about the schools that are underperforming. And it's why we're talking about having a much larger cohort of excellent teachers, because one of the things that happens in underperforming districts is that's not where the math and science teachers are going, and they're coming to it, telling us about all these sort of equity challenges. So I totally agree, and we're trying to think both about it as building it into the resources that we're investing, and then also thinking about additional steps.
I mean, this is a very important issue for the United States to remain competitive globally,
Yes.
so that we're not exporting our engineers into other countries that have come here, have picked up our sciences, our ideas, and have now gone across to other parts and have now become competition. So in order for us to be the leader in the global economy, we have to make sure that we are educating our children here. So for more resources can be allocated to the STEM education and gearing it towards my districts where that have poor resources, that's a very critical thing to do.
Thank you.
Very briefly, my name is Eduardo Batia.
How are you?
The digital divide within the Latino communities is abysmal. I mean, it's horrible. I don't think we can get there unless we first deal with the concept of supplying the right internet, the right
Yes.
speed, the right equipment to the Latino community.
So I think the digital divide, it's a policy area that we work a lot on. It's something that in the broadband plan that the FCC put out, there's a huge focus on how do we sort of think about digital divide as it relates to education. Part of this is we know that a lot of the innovation that's going to happen, a lot of the technology, these trends are going to be really powerful for the learning opportunities that students are going to face. And so the connectivity into the classroom matters a lot, right? So what are the broadband speeds and so Department of Education and the FCC recently stood up a website that sort of tracks broadband speeds. It also means having a lot more investment in this area. And so the president has talked about how there should be additional resources towards a national broadband infrastructure that really starts to enable these kind of speeds. And then third is starting to think about having an explicit focus, and this is something Department of Ed works a lot with the FCC on focusing on underserved community as it relates to digital divide. The fourth area I'd say is it's worth working backwards from how these kind of educational opportunities are enabled. So the president, when he went out to Marquette and talked about the wireless infrastructure of the future, talked about the unique opportunities that distance learning gives you, where you're able to have access to the cutting edge researchers of today, or if you're able to access teachers of today. So I think it's both figuring out why we need this and providing the resources.
Here.
Hi, Jessica Gonzalez with the National Hispanic Media Coalition. We work on media and telecom
Yes.
policy, but in my former life, I was a public school teacher in LA. And we've done a lot of work on the E-rate program. I brought it up earlier today.
Yes.
And was sort of disappointed. I understand it's just to bring broadband into the schools, but I just need to share with you
Yes.
What the situation is in a lot of low-income schools is that they might have a connection, but they have no one there who can help the students learn how to use it.
Right.
And this is holding our students back in very serious ways as the curriculum for math, science, even reading becomes integrated with internet, learning. And so I just want to know, is there going to be any source of funding to either A, get the teachers educated about how to teach their students? Because there's a whole lot of teachers who just want to know but don't have the resources to educate themselves on this.
So I think you're totally right. So there's a huge policy question and a huge area that we're working on, which is how do you there's both the access question, But then there's the empowerment question, right? Which is a lot of times people start with access, but then don't think about how does this drive use. And we have lots of powerful stories where teachers, when given the resources and ways to actually do it, then start to implement it in the classroom as a major impact. The way the Department of Ed has started to think about this is not to have technology be the separate thing that sits there, but embed it into a cross-wide priority into all their programs. So Department of Ed is thinking a lot about technology as a priority in its professional development resources, right? And so I think that's going to have some powerful impact. They're also trying to think about how can they use E-rate and these programs that other agencies like the FCC are running as a way to also have a conversation with school districts around what is your learning strategy, right? So a lot of times it just becomes, hey, we've got this kind of pipe into our classrooms, you know, and they're not thinking about instructional support. I would say that a third area that's important is we also want to make it easier for teachers to connect with each other and engage in cross-professional development. So one of the things that we've sort of noticed is there's a lot of professional development that happens across the teaching sector. And how do we use online tools and these kind of things to build more online communities? Some of this is Department of Education and the National Science Foundation, but I think we would love to work and talk to folks around how do we make this more possible. Part of it is, even in the world of existing resources, we want to put technology much more front and center.
I totally appreciate that. I get worried that some of us are back here still, and we're starting from here and trying to go to here and then there's like a whole group of folks who are just totally left behind.
Right. And we try to work backwards from what are we actually trying to enable educators and students to do. So one of the things, you know, so the Office of Science Tech was there when people were like, what is this internet thing? And the thing was, when you were in 94, 95, the big conversation was just, is this internet thing going to be useful for learning or for, you know, now the question is, we know it can be a really powerful tool. How do we actually make sure, you know, because otherwise, a lot of times when I talk to teachers, they say, you know, the current tools I have available is when I'm thinking about, you know, lesson development, you know, I have either a really good infrastructure at school or somebody down the hallway, or I type it into Google, you know, and then, you know, I see if something comes up. And so the question is, you know, that suggests that we've got some more work to do. And I think a lot of the folks in the tech space are
here and here.
Hi, Mark Magani with the National Latino Coalition on Climate Change. We're always looking for more science, people in the sciences, environmental sciences, etc. One significant disadvantage our community has is the being prepared to learn as an early education. We don't have as much access or the ability, the finance to be able to send our kids into a more formalized early childhood education environment. Oftentimes it's sent to the grandmother's house or whoever can take care of the child. One thing that we're working with is HITN Public Television Network, who's developing television, computer, phone, multi-platform educational systems for early ed, and then growing as they go on, including voc ed. That's using games and Little Miss Spider and these different, to be able to train them both as a child, just basics on education and math and English and environment and obesity messages as well. I do believe that there does need to be more investment in non-traditional, multi-platform ways to educate early childhood education for children who don't have access to the more formalized environments, because oftentimes the kids will be just handed over an iPod or an iPad or just play with this. And if they can give them something to play with that's educational, you can give them that. And so I would love to see more support for that type of multi-platform educational environment.
Right. No, I totally agree. So in education, we call this time on task, right? So in education, the big driving force is the more you can increase time on task, the more students generally perform. Well, like, you know, maybe the video game community has thought a little bit about time on task. They just call it something else, right? Which is if you can increase the amount of highly engaged, you know, sort of engagement with a platform, that has a lot of impact. One of the things that the Department of Ed along HHS is they just launched an early learning Race to the Top challenge. And alongside the $500 million that they're going to invest in this, is they put out a call to high-tech entrepreneurs and researchers to focus on what kind of technology tools could help both students, parents, and healthcare providers in this space. And I think they know that they're on the very early end of this, and they would love to do more. So I think they would certainly be interesting. I think the second part of it is, even the little bit that we've learned in this area shows that we're just touching the beginnings of this, which is Sesame did this really interesting pilot study, which was they said we will give out free cell phone minutes, and we will have Elmo call a parent that signs up, and Elmo will give the parent a letter of the day, and what the parent will do is pick out things during the day that start with that letter. So the letter is T, that's a tree. So there's lots of sort of, when it comes to cognitive word development, about word associations with letters. They then did an evaluation of this program, and it had a pretty interesting spike in word recognition. That was, a small pilot leveraging, basically just a cell phone in a device, and just, a pre-text phone call, and that had some. So, I think that says to us there's a lot more we can do in this area, and we need to be thinking about it.
Also encourage this to be done in a bilingual environment, because oftentimes the parents,
Yes.
if they don't understand that they're not going to reach out to the kids, there's a lot of pushback on the bilingual environment.
No,
in
exactly.
the in the government when it comes to this kind of education. So hopefully you can push that back.
Thank you.
Diana, and then Diana.
Thank you. Diana Rodriguez, Sacramento City Unified School District.
Great.
Thank you. Welcome here. So I have a concern about.
Yes.
It's not necessarily the policy where I'm from. It's the implementation of the policy.
Yes.
And I feel that at the federal level, perhaps we can help push and direct some of this implementation. And so it almost seems like my district talks about SEM, not STEM, because of the way they're choosing to implement the T in the STEM. They feel that as long as there's a computer in front of a child, that's technology. As long as there's programs on that computer, that's technology.
Right.
And so, and right along with our partner back here about the E-rate program and all of the concerns about the lack of availability of staff in the classroom when these children do have the equipment in front of them. And so, even myself as a board member, as a graduate of one of our technology schools, I try to educate, but it's really hard to educate, somebody when they don't even know what a relational database is and how they're using it in their everyday life. And so, how can we direct this policy from our end to the education component to the decision makers that are implementing the policy?
Right. So I think that's a great point. I mean, one of the things that I think people sometimes think about as technology is that you can just put. So imagine if you didn't know what to do with a computer, but I just put it next to your desk while you were working. Well, the kind of business productivity gains that we've had along email, a computer sitting next to somebody, you don't get those just by putting a device next to somebody. The big potential when it comes in why we try to work backwards from applied use. What does technology allow you to do, and then work backwards as to enabling that technology into classrooms. So one of the things, so I worked a lot with Connecticut school districts. One of the things that you would find is, so Connecticut was investing in data systems. So if you just sort of think about data systems as this back-end thing, okay, now you have a data system. Well, the way an instructor usually thinks about it is, how does this help me do my job? And so when you actually invest in sort of thinking about common planning time alongside, hey, here's what we can show you about your classroom, here's what's working, hey, everybody got question 17 wrong, or half the class got it wrong, half the class got it right, and you actually sort of show, okay, well then you start to build it into your planning time, because you're like, hey, this is teaching me something about your classroom. And so I think technology without enabled practice isn't going to ever sort of take off in the same way. Now, of course, we can make things more plug and play, which is, it shouldn't, if somebody says, like, hey, the only way this thing works is if we spend a huge amount of money training everybody, well then, of course, that'd be great, but, that also makes for a huge strategic gap. So the more we can make it such that folks can enable themselves to learn on this stuff, the better. But not thinking that that the enabling doesn't have to happen is just, it's just technology for technology's sake.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
For having to wrap it up. Thank you, Kumar. Appreciate it.
Only 2 more sessions left, guys. You're almost there.
I want, for the purposes of this room, some senior providers here, we'll walk them out.
Oh,
Young
yeah.
children, critically important in schools, but as we all age, myself included.
So we could get the next group of folks coming in?
I don't think that came up because there's a big 5 years ago.
That's okay. I apologize, but I need to keep people moving. Thank you. So the next group that are coming is around how to build neighborhood partnerships and faith-based partnerships with our White House office and our other agencies.
Hey, I gotta know. My mother doesn't know how to use the internet, or she doesn't text me. Now she could Skype, or she could text me. Actually, they connected.
Good. Yes. But that's why we want to be able to ask questions. Good. Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. We got over here up front.
Is that your bag?
My crib.
Testifying in Sacramento, and they got these nice senators or fancy assemblers, and you have to push them.
Take a seat.
Make it easy to access. Yeah. Okay, Felipe, great. And I just start talking. And then all of a sudden,
Was she with you?
Yeah, she was following behind me with her escort.
Okay. What were you saying? What?
So this is the live stream.
Yes, it's the live stream. Yes.
I need to put the button on the mic. When I testify.
So this is supposed to end
In 20 minutes.
But like, not till when we start.
When we start.
Oh, really? Oh, because I thought they were saying we were all behind time and they were like rushing.
We are, but I'm the timekeeper.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Did you keep mine or did I leave it?
So we are still waiting. We could take our seats. We're going to get started. Huh? If we could take our seat, we're going to get started. We have one of our presenters here. And that's Alexia on the phone? Okay, she's on the phone. So this next panel, we have both of our presenters here. One is about to join us shortly. So this next panel is something that everybody in this room knows how to do very well. And we're trying to be able to provide more opportunities to be able to do partnerships here with the administration. And I'm going to allow our two participants, Alexia and Marta, to introduce themselves. They know already that we don't need to do any prepared remarks, that we're just going to jump into questions and answers because we only have 20 minutes. So I'm going to let them start off with their names and what they do and where they're from, and then right away we're going to jump into questions and answers. So you want to begin?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is. Good afternoon. My name is Marta Urquilla. I work in the Domestic Policy Council in the Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation, and I'm a senior policy advisor.
Hello, my name is Alexia Kelly, and I'm Deputy Director in the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Alexia Kelly, I'm the Deputy Director in the White House Office for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships.
Great. Any questions? Yes. Name and organization, please. Gentleman from Puerto Rico.
Eduardo Batia from Puerto Rico. The faith-based office within the White House, which started in the previous administration and is carrying on. How do you draw the line between supporting state, the church and state debate? Because we'll be trying to do that at home, and it's getting messy?
Well, we engage both faith-based and secular nonprofit organizations, so faith-based and neighborhood organizations, and it's serving the common purpose, the common good of our country, and that our mission is to build partnerships between community and faith-based organizations and the government in order to better serve communities in need. We actually do have an advisory council of faith and community leaders that meets, and the first council was charged with the very purpose of looking at some of the legal issues and ensuring strong legal footing of the office. So that was a charge of the first advisory council that met to do that, and those recommendations are have been implemented.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Lilian Rodriguez Lopez. I lead a network of 100 Latino health and human service providers in the Northeast region, and I have become increasingly concerned about the level of support, and when I say support, I mean policy support, but more specifically funding opportunities that are being made available to Latino nonprofits around the country. I see that we're losing capacity in our sector at a time when Latino nonprofits should be grown and more aggressively utilized given what's happening in our country in terms of population growth. The Latino-led institutions are not being fully supported. Is there a strategy or any analysis that's being done at the White House or within your specific area to really analyze how we can build that capacity and better support it? There's a lot of groups that have applied for federal grants. They're not getting federal grants. And I want to say this, and this is a rhetorical question, a rhetorical statement. We're not getting the outcomes that we like around our community. We know that around education and healthcare and a lot of other key areas. The one critical piece that's missing when we look at it is best practices, the funded organizations, and who's not there, the Latino-led service providers. Is there a strategy around that to sort of maintain capacity if they're suffering losses at all levels of state government and city government and federal?
So I think I'll start, and then Alexia also. Oh, sorry, forgive me. I'll start, and then Alexia will answer as well. So one is just taking it back one step. Is just overall the nonprofit sector has taken a hard hit in general, and so. And even without the hit, it's very difficult for the current structure and flow of resources for nonprofits that are doing effective work to be able to continue doing that effective work, focus solely on doing that effective work, and be able to grow and expand those solutions to reach more communities. So part of what we're looking at is how do you realign the incentives and the ways in which the resources are awarded to communities so that you're not duplicating efforts, you're not supplanting efforts, but you're pushing what's working, investing in what works, and using evidence as a standard, performance, results. Many of us, and I've been there, I've worked in the nonprofit sector, we know that often your performance and your results isn't what gets you the dollars that you need to run your organization, which then becomes the distraction that takes you, the innovator, the solution, the community solution, away from your agenda and your mission in pursuit of those results. So we're promoting public-private partnerships, ways in which philanthropy can play a role. We're promoting different approaches to market-based solutions to achieving social impact. So how do we think about the incentives, create an incentive for people to want to be a part of organizational work that is outcomes oriented, that it's about growth and scale, that it's about thinking about the capital in that way. This is very important. Race to the Top, many of you may be familiar with that example, has realigned the ways in which states think about their educational outcomes and how they commit to that agenda. So one is the conversation that just needs to happen around what are the outcomes we want to achieve and how are we rewarding organizations that seek those outcomes. So this is very hard work to do. Two is just also, I think, the idea that we are investing in, this is new to this administration, in the last 2 years of investing in what works. It's a very different way for the federal government to invest in communities, to ask
organizations to show us their track record, to show us their evidence of success, to show us what their proposed design is, how they intend to measure around outcomes, not outputs. So again, behavior changing. I think that we are seeing this in the Social Innovation Fund, for example, which was launched last year. Its first round of grants were announced last summer. We have investments, 138 investments in communities around the country where Latino communities are receiving those dollars to focus on economic opportunity, to focus on creating jobs, to focus on support for young people, focus on health. These are very important investments, and the evaluation component that comes with that will build those best practices, will make it such that those solutions can go to scale to reach more communities, and that is an example of a start. But had it not been for the design of that fund to be focused in the way that it was, I don't know necessarily that those investments would have been made in those communities or others. We're changing the parameters by which you compete for dollars and by which you are rewarded. And that has potentially, those solutions are in a 3 to 5 year period in those local communities. What they deliver in those 3 to 5 years has the potential to reach many, many more communities because of that program.
I just wanted to lift up two initiatives. One at U.S. Department of Health and Human Services at their Human Services arm, Administration for Children and Families. They've, over the last couple of years, a senior advisor there to the Assistant Secretary, has run an initiative to increase the engagement of Hispanic and other communities, typically who are not accessing the agreements and grants to the extent that other communities are, to look at that and make sure that they're at the table for those opportunities. So I can connect you with that initiative at ACE, Administration for Children and Families. And a second initiative is at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Our partnership center there has run a program called La Mesa Completa to ensure the engagement of the Hispanic community in all of the USDA programs. So I'm happy to connect you to that. Those are just two that I would mention today to answer your question.
And I would add to that, with the Corporation for National and Community Service, they have an explicit part of their approach to investing in communities to reach more communities that haven't traditionally been a part of their portfolio. And so outreach to Latino communities is something that they are intently pursuing in terms of building civic participation, which is also part of our office.
My question is for Alexia Kelly. And out of the faith-based offices, I understand you have 12 different faith-based directors and you have deputy directors under those faith-based directors in the different cabinets. And I'd like to know how many of those are Hispanic, since we are representing about 50 million Hispanics in the United States. I'd like to see more representation in there, and also more clergy, especially if you call it a faith-based director. I know David from Homeland Security and also Joshua Duvall, there's 2 clergy, but if you have these faith-based directors in these different cabinets, why don't we have more of an Hispanic representation and more of a clergy in there? Because we need to come to the table at all levels, and I believe that people are having discussions without us, and it's affecting a lot of things that are being done at state levels if we're not at the table at most of these meetings.
There are 13 centers. We don't have deputy directors at all those centers. Some are just a one-person center. One-person strategic advisor, for example, at CNCS and Commerce and SBA and a few others, and some are much larger. And certainly there's lots of growth in that area. The EPA Center is staffing up, so I'm happy to talk to you about that. Roxana Barillas is Deputy Director of a USDA center, so has really made great strides in their initiative that I mentioned before, La Mesa Completa. So there's several, but the percentage, we have some work to do there, I would say. Thank you.
Any other questions? Right here and then back there.
Dixon Slingerland with the Youth Policy Institute. You mentioned investing in what works. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the Promise Neighborhoods initiative.
Yeah, a lot of these funds, I mean, the relationship is there as well in terms of, one, the place-based investments we think are very, very important from the domestic policy standpoint. I mean, we see the interrelation of all these funds. Where there are place-based investments like Promise Neighborhoods, there are also groups that have applied for the Social Innovation Fund or have applied for the I3 fund, et cetera. So we know that when you put out a call for a grant competition, there's that interplay and those relationships are there at the table. So one, we want to be aligned in what we put out.
too, we want to be supportive. And in the case of, for example, the Social Innovation Fund, we think many of those investments are kinds of the things that make something like a Promised Neighborhoods possible, because they support some of the wraparound kind of work that those programs need. But we see all of these as strategies to bringing dollars into communities from the federal government in new ways, where you're leveraging, in some cases, a public-private partnership where you're focused intently on results and you're giving communities a way to address the social problems where they're leading the way in terms of their solution, their ideas for their solutions.
I want to just add to the question the first gentleman had, I think was really important, and I just want to add one point to my answer, which is that I think what the faith-based and neighborhood partnership initiative achieves is we only advocate supporting, or we don't have grants ourselves. So there's a myth that we have faith-based money and there's no grants that explicitly go to faith-based organizations. But federal dollars are supporting a secular purpose that these organizations provide, and their regulations that the agencies, that the federal funds cannot support explicitly or inherently religious activity. That would be violating the Constitution and establishing religion, but nor do we want to violate people's freedom of religious practice as well. So there's that balance, but all the agencies have regulations in place to make sure that they're following that important constitutional parameter, but they're supporting the work of community-based organizations, whether they're secular or faith-based, to serve the common good and produce a secular purpose for their communities. So just want to add a point to that answer.
Back there.
Yes, good afternoon. Rosie Dalva with Casa de Esperanza. Earlier when we had the folks here from SBA, we were talking about the importance of minority-owned businesses, of getting the data of how the federal money is reaching those minority-owned businesses and how we build the access to capital. And I just want to put forward that we need to do the same thing with Latino community-based organizations. We need a minority-owned, community-based organization initiative. We can see how federal money is reaching these organizations, sort of piggybacking on what Lillian said. We need data on that, and I think we need to recognize that there's a real key value in building capacity and leadership within our Latino community-based organizations. That a lot of people, especially in this anti-immigrant sentiment, are very fearful to access mainstream services, that there isn't trust, that there isn't cultural linguistic access in other organizations that maybe have the evidence-based research that is harder for our communities to do. And we need to really realize the value of building this capacity in our communities to see how we can channel more of those federal resources in that direction. I'd like to know what else can be done that you see to make that happen.
Well, I think one is, the approach to open government, for example, and asking for more transparency and more sharing of data, and that's something that this administration has been promoting. Certainly these new funds all come with that approach to open grant making. And the idea that data can also define new markets and define new opportunities. And so it's important for us all to be thinking about that. But I also think it would point to, the need to build the pipeline to come into federal programs. Because part of what is so needed is the capacity building to be able to not only know how to apply for a federal grant, but to be at a place where organizationally you are at the capacity to not only apply, but to receive and implement a federal grant. These are very complex grants. They require a lot of administrative capacity, and so it's as much as having a guide to do it, but to have the organization equipped with the appropriate systems to be able to do it and to be accountable for the federal dollars. I mean, it's very, very complicated in terms of the regulations. But then the more that funding opportunities become based on evidence of success and become focused on social impact and the kinds of results organizations are achieving, organizations also need to build that capacity to get beyond telling the story of their success anecdotally, but to also be able to talk and make decisions based on data. And so that's something that is not exclusive to the Latino community. This is across the board for the nonprofit sector. So this is something that needs to happen everywhere.
And there, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, just that there is an initiative at HHS, the Strengthening Communities Fund, which has provided funding for capacity building. So there have been some programs, funding programs, as well as non-financial toolkits and other resources to support capacity building of nonprofit organizations.
Over here and then over there.
Thank you. Ruben Gallegos, State Representative from Arizona. And prior to that, I was in the military with the Marine Corps. And one of the problems that we're having, young returning veterans from the war, is that we have high cases of PTSD. A lot of us want to enter some kind of workforce that is going to require us to go through mental screenings. So there's a lot of veterans that are avoiding the VA but still need mental treatment. So I'd like to encourage the faith-based initiative maybe to work to somehow create a loop system outside the VA where young veterans can go feel comfortable, feel that they're going to be able to get some kind of help and still have it in a confidential manner, because right now there's just a lot of young veterans that are skipping the VA because they just don't feel comfortable talking to the VA because they feel it's going to be a mark on their permanent record. So if there's any kind of synergy you guys can create in that, I think that would be really helpful, especially in the Latino community, because 20% of veterans now are Latinos, and we tend to be on the front lines, which really severely impacts us.
And actually, in this very room last February, we did a listening session with about 30 to 40 faith-based and community-based organizations and leaders on this question. As the Joining Forces, the First Lady's initiative to support military families and veterans, was taking shape, we wanted to seek their input to look at how we can make sure to involve faith and community leaders in Joining Forces. We did a call with the First Lady in May and are looking at now resources to support clergy and community leaders in supporting military families and veterans on the kinds of issues that you
Time
discussed.
for one quick last question.
Carmen Delgado, Voto National Conference of Puerto Rican Women. How do your organizations deal with the Corporation for National Service? What's happened to AmeriCorps? And are you involved at all with the White House Council on Women? Are they involved in these kinds of initiatives that you're promoting?
So on the Council on Women, I'm not involved. I don't know if Alexia is in our office, is not. But with the Corporation for National and Community Service, that's one that our office, the Office for Social Innovation and Civic Participation, works very closely with. We did just see a very difficult budget period, not just for that agency, but for all agencies, and the corporation was able to come away with 94% of its budget, which was everyone deemed as a success, having started at the potential scenario of being zeroed out from the budget. And what was remarkable about that was the way in which the sector, the field, the grantee network, and the partners that rely on AmeriCorps and VISTA members and Senior Corps members in their communities mobilized in defense of that budget. And we see it as being very critical to the mission of engaging Americans in civil society and having active citizen engagement. National service is a priority of the President and the First Lady. So it's something that we hope to see continue to be protected in the budget. These are important programs that are in many communities around the country. And sometimes people don't realize that the services that they and their families or their neighbors are receiving are in fact supported by these investments in national service, especially in the case of natural disasters and disaster response, what we've seen with tornadoes and flooding, all those storms, that those volunteers are volunteers that either are national service volunteers or they are being coordinated by national service volunteers. So it's a very important investment.
Great. Well, thank you again. Thanks again. Let's give them a round of applause for their participation. And we're getting ready to do our final round before we head down to the South Court. Thank you all. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure you get that on camera.
Thank you. And the last panel that we are going to do today is going to talk about the Healthcare Act and early childhood and childhood obesity health care. So two areas that are actually very important to our community. If we could let the presenters go to the next workshop, please. We need to let the presenters go to the next workshop.
Part of the problems, I don't know. Absolutely. Go ahead. No, I'm sorry about that. Actually, I got more frustrated with the power and so that's why I ran.
And just a reminder, if you're tweeting, to tweet at the White House, at the WH, or hashtag Hispanic Ed. Hashtag Hispanic Ed. Do I have to?
Yes, you have to. I just got turned down.
Oh, no, I saw the news on it. Take it back.
Actually, like the sports and passion,
Control the Republic.
Oh, they would love that.
Mhm.
They would love that.
Oh, wow. Porque mira, yo llego tarde por la noche mañana, sí, llego mañana. El problema que estamos teniendo aquí es que
we're ready like a test set for these programs.
If we could get started. We're going to get started. Yeah, we're going to get started. Okay, so it's just two?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Perfect. We'll be able to. Oh, yeah. All right, we're getting ready to start our last session. And again, our last session is something, again, that's very true and dear to our hearts around healthcare. And I'm going to have, again, the two presenters introduce themselves. This is our last session, so again, this will be a good opportunity for the next 20 minutes, and we got to be downstairs before 4 o'clock for our closing. So this is an opportunity, again, to ask your questions, make them succinct, and then we'll be able to do the round of what we're calling Obama 101. And tomorrow is where we're going to then give at the 4 o'clock session downstairs is where we're going to give the instructions for tomorrow's open space session, an all-day open space session. So again, I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get right into the questions.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Is this on? Oh, thank you. I'm Yvette Sanchez Fuentes. I'm the director for the Office of Head Start in the Administration for Children and Families at the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm going to share with you a little bit about what ACF does, and then we are absolutely happy to take questions. ACF is a $60 billion organization. It's the other side of the health piece. We are the human services side. It includes Head Start, child care, foster and adoptive care. It includes services for families needing child support. It includes some of the programs that folks are more familiar with, TANF, LIHEAP, provides services for refugees, as well as houses the administration for Native Americans and for people with disabilities. You could say that ACF in the 21st century is the safety net of the 1960s war on poverty. With regards to Hispanics, ACF has instituted what they are calling the ACF Accessibility Initiative, which really began with the Hispanic community reaching out to the previous Assistant Secretary, Carmen Nazario, in order to create more access and communication with the Hispanic community around grants and other funding opportunities to increase access to community-based organizations as well as to the Hispanic community at large. In Head Start specifically, we are an $8 billion funded program. We serve 1 million children across the country, 33% of which are Latinos. And I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, who's the healthcare guy.
I'm the healthcare guy, thank you. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about where we are with health reform implementation and its importance and the Affordable Care Act. So my name is Garth Graham. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Minority Health at the Department of Health and Human Services. And I'm also a board-certified internist. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about healthcare and what we're doing, not just from the concept of the policy person, but certainly a little bit from the clinical aspect as well and why it's so important. So in a nutshell, and try and do this in 4 minutes, and why
Can you do it in 1 minute? Because
Can
we
I
want to
do-
get into
can I
our
do it
questions.
in 1 minute?
1 minute.
Why is health reform important to Latino communities? Well, 1 in 3, 33%, 34% of Latinos are uninsured. If you look at even that other 67%, many of those folks are underinsured, meaning though they have insurance, if they got sick, their health insurance would not be able to protect them through their illness to help keep them safe. So certainly one of the things that we are very proud of is that the Affordable Care Act deals with health insurance expansion as well as patient protections and other activities to help not only expand health insurance to those Latinos and other folks who are uninsured, but also patient protections that put in place abilities for health insurance to be there when you get sick. One statistic, many of you know, about 70% of the folks who declare bankruptcy because of medical expense actually have health insurance. So what does that mean? It means that we, the things that we're doing right now to protect folks who have insurance, removing lifetime limits, removing annual caps, all of those things, help protect people, many folks from our communities, to help protect them with the insurance they already have. So I'm going to stop there and hopefully talk to you about all the other things I wanted to talk to you about in terms of healthcare.
Great. We have questions. Name and organization.
Ernesto Loperena, New York Council on Adoptable Children. One of the most vulnerable populations in the United States are kids who are have been removed from their homes and are in foster care as a result of abuse and neglect. And although the total number of children in foster care has gone down from about 500,000 to a little over 400,000, there is a disturbing trend. And the disturbing trend is that the percentage of Latino kids in that system has been going up. Are there any plans or policies to take a look at that particular issue and deal with it?
So let me just say right off the bat, I don't know all the specifics with regards to those pieces, but I can assure you that my colleague, Brian Samuels, who is the commissioner for the administration for children and families, has taken a focus on keeping children with their families. So taking more of that stand of figuring out how do we keep our families together and provide other supports so that children's lives don't get disrupted on a regular basis. I was also told that we can also take those questions and that someone would be getting back to you to provide more specific information. So we will definitely jot that down and have the commissioner respond.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Could you speak up, please?
Yes, I'm Jesse Beck, the homeless president of Minnesota, and I was a Minnesota delegate to the SAMHSA national meeting on looking at healthcare homes for the CARE Act and reducing health disparities. And Dr. thank you and your staff, Dr. Bennett, and others did a great job at that conference.
Thank you, and I'm going to take your comment to add another thing, which is through Teresa's work as well as other folks working with folks in communities, we are trying to elevate the issue of Latina behavioral and mental health issues. Within many minority communities, the stigma associated with mental health and behavioral health has we have to deal with that stigma, and we have to deal with those challenges. And so there's a focus in the department to look more at integrative care and issues along those lines, and hopefully try and make that a priority. So if you go to our website, minorityhealth.hhs.gov, you will see some information on what we're trying to do there.
Great. Next question, right there. In following up what you said and in looking at the stigmatization within the Latino community, we also have to look at another aspect, and we are finding that we don't have enough trained social workers within the Latino community. We need to begin to work with organizations of higher learning. We have to be able to provide opportunities to Latino, male and female Latino, who will go to the mental health system. I'm a product of that. I received a grant from AOA, and I was able to get my master's. But we don't have enough of that. Those grants are gone, and we need that. We need particular funds that are going to be earmarked to develop a cadre of individuals that are going to take care of our Latino community.
You're exactly right. In fact, I didn't plant that question. We have never met before, but I'll tell you that a couple of months ago we entered into a partnership with the National Association of Social Workers to deal with the disparities in the disparities in the social workforce, as well as making sure that there's cultural competency on the other end with folks who do come out in the workforce, whether they're minority or non-minority, or Latino or non-Latino, and being able to treat folks with behavioral and mental health problems appropriately. So that is one challenge. And the other work with integrative care work is actually also focused on the workforce as well. And there's a big portion of it. In fact, the report that we just put online is on the Latino workforce in behavioral health and how do we work together to do it. So it's a big focus for our office through the work of Teresa Chapa as well as other individuals there. But I'll tell you that the challenges with the workforce go back to making sure that we also have folks within the K through 12 system, and it goes through this is through the challenge with the medical workforce writ large, both in behavioral health and non-behavioral health, and a lot of it goes to where our president is trying to push us to make sure that we emphasize math, science, technology, and all these other things that help people be able to get into health and behavioral health fields.
Because I'm telling you that you will see a direct correlation that when the workforce, or Latino workforce increases in that area, you will see that the stigmatization is going to decrease. Tony?
Yeah, question. My name is Tony Baez. I'm the Executive Director of the Council for the Spanish Speaking in Milwaukee. And this question is more on the lines of a Head Start. And this initiative here basically is a policy discussion. We're trying to make sure that you take back some of the policy concerns that we have. In the previous discussion, we talked about accountability, the previous groups that was here. And it seems to me, and many other in the field of early education, that the issue of accountability has taken sort of like the twist of catch you, the catch-you-all kind of thing, where you may have some things that have happened in certain parts of the country, and everybody's paying for it, unannounced visits and things like that. And even though there is, obviously we want to be accountable, and we want to make sure that we do things right, the issue of unannounced visits, of this extreme form of accountability, because I can't say it to you in any other way, and testing and assessment that sometimes goes overboard, and the local insistence by local governments and state governments to cut in the area of early education, sort of like a combining to put the kind of pressure on people that want to do the right things at the community level. And there is a concern. What can we do to make sure that we are accountable, but to use continuous progress to make sure that qualitatively organizations that have been around for a very long time continue to do what they do well with the help of the administration, but not to feel the unnecessary pressure, of an extreme accountability that puts us in a defensive mode.
Well, I think just to build on a little bit about what you're saying, in terms of what we're doing at the Office of Head Start, within Head Start specifically, but in the early childhood community at large. We have an office at ACF that focuses specifically on early childhood, not just on the education and the health pieces, but all the pieces that go into making a child and a family successful. You know, we are looking, yes, to hold our programs accountable, but at the same time, we're also including the supports that our programs may need. We definitely recognize that there have been many organizations across the country who have been providing these services for a very long time. But now what we really want to do is infuse the science of what we know is best practices with what we know fits at the local community. And so as programs are coming to us, we definitely are working with programs on a one-to-one basis if necessary to make sure that programs have the supports that they need as they may have an unannounced visit or as other pieces come up. You know, the thing that we're also looking at is really looking more at monitoring as an ongoing process so that it is a continuous improvement process that builds into what are we at the federal level doing to hold ourselves accountable if we're holding our programs accountable. So we're building in these models that include not just holding our programs accountable, but holding our federal staff and our contractors accountable for the kinds of support that they're providing to programs on a regular basis. Let me just say one last thing about these unannounced visits. I have to tell you that across the country, programs have really felt like these are actually a positive aspect of what we've changed, because we really have moved towards that monitoring should not be a one-time piece. It really should be a continuous improvement process that happens throughout the year. And so we're working in that direction.
I hope that they don't contradict each other. Okay?
Right here.
Hello, Iris Zuniga, Chief Operating Officer for Youth Policy Institute. And my question is with regards to the education, the healthcare reform that's going on, and the deadline for implementation is obviously, upcoming in the next couple of months, next year or two. What is the plan in terms of lining up messaging both from the federal government to the state, to some point to the city, to county, to making sure that all this information about all these great things that are going to happen under this new opportunity are actually getting out to the Latino community? We know that there's obviously a huge percentage that are uninsured, and those that are insured, like you mentioned, are not fully insured in terms of the access and resources. So how are we making sure that the actual information is getting out there in a timely manner, considering a lot of these things are going to be happening really soon?
Yeah, well, to be honest, a lot of things are happening right now and have happened. So it is not a train that's off in the future. The train is actually moving now. So we're certainly trying our best to work with organizations across the country as a broader department to educate folks on what's happening now and what will be occurring in the future. Things that are happening now are certainly a lot of the patient protections. You know, the fact that insurance companies can no longer deny children coverage based on a pre-existing condition. The fact that we have pre-existing condition insurance plan that's put in place to help provide options for people who have pre-existing conditions, and as well as some of the other things around lifetime limits and annual caps that I mentioned before. So all of these things are things that we're moving on now. The things that you're talking about in the future are certainly 2014 when we have the health insurance exchanges put in place. But all the investments in community health centers, $11 billion in community health centers, 67% of them which provide care to minority communities, are things that are already ongoing. So I guess my answer to you is we're trying to work with everyone, people in this room, people across the country, to help certainly educate folks. We always point folks to www.healthcare.gov, and the Spanish version is there as well, to help educate people. But certainly we want to make sure that everybody knows that the train is moving with the reform.
Doctor, whatever you can do to get that out, because the accomplishment is so major. And like, we did it, and then we moved on to other things. And of course the Republicans are going to find, the one thing that didn't work, right? And there are, millions of Americans that have been benefited by one of the most important legislative accomplishments in the history of any administration. And so we tend to get worried about getting it all right as opposed to making sure. Yeah. This is Washington. If a tree falls in the forest and no one covers it, it didn't actually fall. So.
And with that, I would love to give our two panelists a round of applause and thank them for their participation. Lillian, I would like to, you want to say something before we go downstairs? Yeah, let me just before you do, let me give you a little bit of time to prep. One, I want to give them a round of applause, but I also want to recognize all of you in the room that been here for 7 hours of this round-robin conversation. Our you know, our hope in doing this is you are able to make those connections. We have bios here of all the speakers. We're going to be sending you their emails, and we also have taken notes from all of the questions that everybody here asked during each session. And so each panelist is going to receive the question and the name of who asked the question, and we're going to obviously CC the Hispanic Federation to make sure, the National Hispanic Federation, to make sure that they've also been CC'd on it, so there could be some follow-up. So I just want to make sure that you all know that that's what we're doing on our end, and we're going to head downstairs. My suggestion is to take the stairs,
Question.
but anything else to be able to head
Are we going to be able to get a roster of
I
every?
just want to thank all of you for being here today, and also, more important, for being here tomorrow.
Right.
Because that's when we have an opportunity to take an even deeper dive. I know this was a tough environment. We wanted to get a lot of groups in and out of the room, make connections. As important as meeting people in the administration is us meeting each other and thinking about how we further a Latino dialogue across the country and a Latino dialogue, continuing Latino dialogue with the administration. So I think this has the potential to be very powerful. Not perfect, but very powerful. And I thank you for that. And I want to thank you for keeping us on task.
Sure.
That's why you are so tough, and thank you.